Our next speaker is our honorary doctor, Frances Lucy. Frances Lucy is a professor and active at the Atlantic Technological University in Sligo, Ireland. She is an internationally recognized researcher in the field of invasive species, among other things. Frances has been one of the driving forces for developing an extensive collaboration with Mid-Sweden University through annual teacher and student exchanges. With an extensive international research network, she has also reviewed the contributions to both the Swedish Research Council and the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency. Frances is also a member of the advisory committee of the Irish Environmental Protection Agency. Very welcome, Frances.
Okay, it's like online lecturing. I'll start again. Okay. Tom Anavrodul ve anseo live in Juve. I'm very proud to be here today talking about my research, about collaborations with Mid-Sweden University, and just about my own path as a researcher. Yesterday I was asked whether I had too many slides, and did I realize that I only had 15 minutes, so I said yes, I do. So so I started life in Cork City, moved out to the country at the age of 5, 6, and after that I was rarely with my feet out of the water in a stream or a river, and progressed onwards to study zoology at University College Cork, where my father had taught. And I want to begin, of course, by talking about the partnership with Mid-Sweden University, which really Catherine Glack, who's in the audience here today, was really a powerhouse behind that, and Bega, who's behind her there. Catherine managed to convince with my boss with Mid-Sweden University for our then IT Sligo to join as a partner on a wonderful 2-week summer university on sustainability. So now with 3 other university partners, we're very involved in hosting the summer university every 2 to 3 years. And you can see here the group that we had today, including one very brave cyclist who cycled all the way from the campus here to Ireland. And we had over 40 students working on a range of projects with us. These are the sort of projects involved. So they were out and about, they were in the classroom giving presentations, and it's interdisciplinary, and I want to bring that through my talk today, that this is all very interdisciplinary. And the last talk was really interesting because there are lots of parallels in the natural world with working with political science, I believe. So the other really important achievement that we have is that we run an international conference on education with sustainability every second year. And we have had that on the campus of Atlantic Technological University twice now. We've had a very successful virtual conference held by Mid-Sweden University as well 2 years ago. So this is the collaboration, and it is so strong, and it's brought so many people together. Even in my own campus, we're working together with people that we wouldn't normally work across faculties. And we've had a lot of international speakers, keynote speakers from Sweden and elsewhere. So it is a complete pleasure to work with Mid-Sweden University. I really want to say that. So chuffed to be here today, giving this presentation to you. So what do I do? I'm the head of Department of Environmental Science. I'm really a researcher, but of course I got drawn into this, bringing a department and bringing it on in terms of full-time and online programs in the environment and sustainability and health and safety. My heart really is in aquatic ecology. That's where I started with zoology. I'm the director of a research centre. I'm the chair of a state agency in Land Fisheries Ireland, which has a role in protecting and conserving and developing inland fisheries in Ireland. I'm president of an international association for invasive species, but most of all I want to work with and for the people as a public servant, and that's really my remit. And occasionally we have unusual visitors on campus, so I just thought I'd bring out this photograph. This was about 5 years ago. We had a visit from who was then the Prince Charles. So this is me back in 1986 in the front row there with our Italian external examiner. It's interesting because out of the 9 people that graduated in my class, I'm the only one who's still active in the field. At that time, you know, you can see how well worn my books are. I still have my books. I pull them out on the table, took a photograph of them. But at that time, there was no invasion science. There was no invasive species science. So, you know, we talked there about the protest movement. I think these are species working in the protest movement, because back in the 1980s, invasive species weren't even in the index of the tried and trusted ecology book. So that was something that came along, really started towards the end of the 20th century. It even still sounds strange saying the 20th century, but it recognized that certain species were moving around the planet and were causing harm to native biodiversity, and it became a science in itself. So I started my career in invasion science out on the lakes and rivers of the Shannon, and you'll see actually my friend Monica, who's with us today in the photograph on the bottom. We were monitoring a particular species called zebra mussels. The top photograph there shows zebra mussels and shows the I don't know how that works, it doesn't really matter. It shows the dense growth of these species. So these species came into Ireland on the hulls of boats from countries elsewhere in Europe, and they quickly formed very dense populations over a number of years. Each of those, which are only the size of your fingernails, can filter up to a litre of water a day. So they could filter the entire lake we were studying within 10 days, whereas the natural overturn would have been 60 days. So big impacts on the actual ecosystems in lakes, in Irish lakes and rivers. So that was the early days. We sweated it out. We took an awful lot of samples every day. We measured them, we monitored them, and it was all about the monitoring at that stage of my career and producing reports on that with Monica and other people. But you know, moving forwards in time, that became so much more, because in 2014 we had a new regulation in Europe, the invasive species regulation, and it being a regulation, it meant that member states had to were obliged to follow that regulation from day one. And invasive alien species are not just species that come in from elsewhere. They have to be shown to threaten or adversely impact on biodiversity. And they've been found to have ecological, economic and socio-economic impact. So they are they are drivers of change. So even if you don't care about biodiversity, people care about economics, right? And they care about social changes. Maybe it means that you can't go out and collect your favorite crayfish from your river anymore because it's no longer there, because another crayfish has come in and brought in crayfish plague and killed off the entire population. So they're wide-ranging impacts. It's not just something specialized that nobody needs to know about. So really that's why the engagement with invasive species needs to become so much more. So to give you an example of an impact like that, this is a lake. I mean, looking at this, it could be Sweden, right? This is actually Ireland, in the west of Ireland. It's Loch Corrib, a very large lake that's very important tourism, for angling particularly. And within a number of years, this particular bay went from being totally accessible for boaters and anglers to this, right? So this is just one species called Lagrosiphon major. It's a curly African pondweed. It came in aquaria. It was used as an oxygenating plant. You can still buy it, and I won't mention the names of the chains that sell it. Some well-meaning person emptied out their fish tank into a lake, and within a number of years this happened. It grows vegetatively. It doesn't need partners. In fact, they're all one sex in Ireland, so I think they're all male. So this is the kind of impacts that we're talking about. So that lake is pretty useless. So I'm not going to go heavily into the science, but we have an exponential growth and spread, and we go from a point where you're preventing the species, and if you cannot prevent it coming in, you might get to eradicate it at the very early stages of invasion, but unfortunately, particularly for aquatic species, we don't see them being there. And after that, you're talking about long-term management. So what does long-term management look like over time? Well, the most recent estimate last year, the mean cost of managing invasive species worldwide is about $27 billion a year globally. Now, this is the regulation. Again, I'm not going to go into this in detail, but we try to prevent introduction. So that's where a lot of education comes in. We try to rapidly eradicate them by early detection and then eradication, and then we must manage them. So every member state is responsible for that. How do we know which species are important? We carry out what are known as risk assessments. So every year, member states or the commission, scientific experts, nominate species, and then those species are risk assessed. Some of them might be in Sweden and they're not in Ireland, or they could be in Italy and they might not be in Ireland. They could be within the EU, but we need to risk assess them anyway because we have to find out their impacts. Now at this stage we're really looking at biodiversity impacts, but we also carry out a management annex, which includes costings for treatment management of those species. So that's very important on a member state level. I'm very fortunate because I'm involved in that project. I'm one of the experts that creates those risk assessments, which are then brought forward. So last year, or actually this year, in the latest update was in August, and we now have 88 species. So Sweden, every other member state is responsible for managing those 88 species, whether they're in the country or not in the country. And this is a list of the species, and one of those species there, Limnoperna fortunei, the golden mussel, was one of the species that I risk assessed a number of years ago. It's taken 5 years to actually get onto the list, but it's now on the list of species that we have to watch out for to prevent. It's not in Europe yet. We have to prevent the introduction of that species. So who are these people? Who implements IAS management? Who, me? Yeah, you, everybody, really. And it was interesting in the last talk because we talked about education, and education being the thing that holds people back more than anything else. So we try to educate people through engagement with citizens as much as we can. I was involved in an Interreg project which is just finished called the CAN project, where we worked on the ground with the local people to try to integrate actions to prevent the spread of invasive species. And there were a whole number of partners involved in that. It was across Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland and Scotland. And I'm just going to quickly go through these slides. I know I don't have a whole lot more time, but we were working on a lake for our project. We were trying to prevent the spread of this particular weed, which is already in the lake and has impacts on a native charophyte species. So we're trying to manage that. So how could we do that? We found a boating area. We put down jute matting to create a highway so the boats could enter and leave the lake, particularly leaving the lake without bringing that weed to other lakes. So this is the jute matting going down on the lake. And This is just showing you the reduction in the treated areas of that particular, where we'd put down the jute highway in the following year. And this is the publication that we have produced as a result of that. So we have marker buoys launched in the area where all the boats go out onto this lake. So when they leave the lake, they are leaving without the weed on their boats. But moreover, they are getting, they have posters, we have signage, we have a bio box with disinfectant so that they can disinfect their equipment. So it's a big educational piece as well as being a control piece. And this is just to show you, that's just showing you a boat going in and out of that particular lake through that biosecure highway. So you can see that it's quite a wide area and there's plenty of room for the boats to go in and out. We also brought anglers in to do a biosecurity training workshop so that they could actually work on that. And then we had a celebration day as well, and we did some training at that. And we produced a booklet for the local schools. So we're reaching out to all the communities. So I know I don't have a lot more time. So another thing that I am involved in is actually an open association for people who want to work on invasive species. So this is an international community of practice where we're trying to flow the knowledge around between science and management to manage invasive species. And we're also just finishing an EU project on communication and understanding of invasive species, where we're working with a number of stakeholder platforms, people involved in the pet trade, people involved in recreational angling, soil transport, and we're bringing together all these stakeholders and having meetings with them so that they can come up with solutions. And so it's a co-creation process, which is the only way. We've carried out a baseline survey with them at the start and then a survey with them at the end, so that the knowledge, we could show how the knowledge has been shared. And we've also created through the project a whole series of resources in multiple languages that are available on the EASN European website, where any of these stakeholders can take these particular products. We have videos, we have posters, just to try to increase the outreach and the education to all of our stakeholders, because that's so important. Finally, I'm involved in the policy piece. So some of the projects that I'm involved in provide direct information for policy. For example, this EPA research project. And also we've been putting out policy recommendations to the government in the Republic of Ireland for managing invasive species. So we're really hoping that that's going to move forward in terms of management within our own member state in Ireland. So I'm involved as a scientist. I would say that in my key messages would be interdisciplinarity. Your work has to be multifactorial, and the outreach and education piece is probably the most important piece. Sometimes we have to sacrifice a little bit of the scientific content where we'd really like to go into the detail, because that's actually that's sort of indulgence for ourselves. We have to work to try to protect biodiversity, and the only way that we can do that, protecting biodiversity in terms of educating people about invasive species, which are going to completely impact on our biodiversity, is to educate as many people and to involve as many people as possible. So thanks very much. That's the end of my talk.
Thank you for the presentation. And now there are time for questions. Yes? Oh yes, I'm not the one to run now.
Thank you very much for this presentation, and me and my colleagues are very happy to have you finally appropriately affiliated to us. I'm a little bit curious about your thoughts about the policy developments. Do you think that this issue is adequately and sufficiently dealt with in policy at the EU level now? And what about outside of EU? Are things going in the right direction or the wrong direction?
I wouldn't say they're going in the wrong direction. I think that we constantly, you know, have to beat the drum here because, you know, to be perfectly honest, there obviously are, I wouldn't say conflicts, but the whole area of trade, we're actually putting it up to them because there are, you know, it makes their lives a lot more complicated when they want to do export and import, because we're asking quite a lot. You know, we've in other projects we've worked on biosecurity at ports and airports, and it's quite difficult to get in there at that stage. So I think it's a question, you know, one thing that I've really noticed in my career is the importance of breaking down silos. So I think the project that we just did there, the European project, was really interesting because we were working, for example, with the pet trade, and you're trying to deal with the pet trade and explain to them how important it is that these species don't escape into the wild. Or you're talking about the food trade. So we have to keep moving in there. It's not a simple thing. And to me, from my experience, my humble experience of the last 20 years, that is the biggest challenge that we have really, is the trade movement. And we keep trying, and we will not give up meeting the right people and getting to work with them, because it is definitely possible, just as it makes life a little bit more complicated. That's all. But we need it for our biodiversity. We only have one planet. Yeah.
Do we have any more questions?
Oh,
Thank you so
thank you.
much for your
Thanks.
presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks.